Ethis Asher is one of the most beloved content creators associated with the Final Fantasy XIV community. He's an incredibly involved member of the community. He's a great representative of why we're thrilled to be getting a Australian data center, an oceanic data center. He's had a huge impact on the community, especially for the number of times he's posted. But he's been away for a while. He's been away. And so he published on July 9th, kind of revealing himself coming back. And he called himself in the thumbnail, I think, like a sellout. And so I wanted to kind of address some of his concerns in the video, because I think there's things that someone else can say about you that you can't say about you. I think we all kind of have our own doubts in our own person, and if we try to overcome those, you know, it doesn't come across quite right. And so I wanted to kind of have a chance to say some of these things. I've already seen this video in its entirety, and I only want to address what's in the video. For anybody that doesn't know who Ethis Asher is, he's one of our big lore creators for all the WoW people coming over. Think of him like a Noble 87. So for anybody else in the space, you're very much looking at that. It's deep edited content. He's done a fair bit of Twitch streaming, not exclusively to 14. And when he's in 14, he's not exclusively a lore creator, in that, like, that's not all he's interested in. But Final Fantasy lore is what he's most known for. If you want to start anywhere, his Fireside stuff, I will just put like a giant asterisk on there that it's a generally known fact within the community that you don't watch Ethis content if you're spoiler sensitive, because there's really no way to consume Ethis without spoilers. So sellout is kind of a word he used. He's on a different point in his journey with content creation than I am, and I wanted to kind of offer maybe a little more additional insight than he could get to. We'll probably jump around just a little bit.
I'm at work right now. I'm in the office. I'm at work. I'm going to tell you guys a story, but just to kind of like give you some context here. I'm at work, and my boss is really, really cool, and he's okay with me kind of using this space and all this stuff after work to stream from. So that's where I'm at the moment. I've been actually spending a lot of time setting it up. Yes, work has a green screen. Yeah, work has a green screen. Work has cameras and microphones and lights and a recording and streaming rig, and it's been a big part of my job to kind of set all that up over the last several weeks. I don't have Final Fantasy XIV on this computer yet. I haven't played patch 5.55 yet either, so we're not going to talk about that today.
So I think, first of all, once again, having already been in the future on this video, having already seen this one, as opposed to typically where I watch these on my own, with this being this long, I didn't think I'd react to it at all, but I did want to get some thoughts out on it in post. I think a lot of why he's struggling is when you move into being a content creator in the space, especially a content creator who is associated with things of passion. DPS guides, lore, creative style content, RP, things like that, where there is a level of fidelity to your content, where maybe the posting schedule is not the point, it's quality over quantity. So when you look at somebody within the WoW space like a Mad Season, or you look at like Noble 87, or within the 14 space, you look at like Larry Czar or Ethis as some of the bigger ones, but by far not alone. When you're talking about people that are bringing humor to the space, or bringing complexity to the space, or bringing depth of knowledge to the space in a way where they're posting so infrequently that you end up with high amounts of editing, like the Jesse Cox video. You end up with very carefully worded scripts. you end up with these videos that can, for whatever time they're relevant, be incredibly impactful. And when you start to move into content like that, I will say that the disadvantage over that versus something like Brian and I, where we kind of just put our thoughts down on the page and hit publish, is that each video is this labor of love. And one of the reasons I think he's probably struggling with this transition from an outsider's perspective, I haven't spoken to him or anything, is he hasn't even played 5.55. And so I think a lot of that kind of like disconnect is that TLDR, looking into the future of this post, I think not all of it's perfect, but I think he's moving towards what will likely be a positive chapter in his life, and he's making decisions that long-term he believes are the right decision for him, and that is totally disconnected from the fact that he's separate right now from the community that has defined so much of the previous chapter of his life. In the last 2 weeks, I can tell you that I went to deleting the YouTube Studio app off my phone. There's this weird, when you first start making content, you're so excited that just anybody watches it and just anybody comments. And so like you start to let it creep into your life. And I have no idea how somebody who has the level of passion and depth for each individual post like he does can separate himself from posting regularly, streaming regularly, and being active in the way that he has been with his community.
We are just going to have a conversation because there's a lot that I need to catch you guys up on. Some of it I have to be vague about. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions as well. And I really miss all you guys, and I just want to be able to like hang out with you. So let's see. Was it 10 weeks ago now? I was offered a job. This is obviously, I was back in Norway, I was back in Hamar, and I was offered this job, and it was very strange and very esoteric, and there wasn't a whole lot of information about it, but it piqued my curiosity, it piqued my interest, and I had a conversation with the guy who offered it, who's now my boss, and I don't want to be too specific because I don't really want to dox myself. I want to kind of try and keep these worlds separate for as long as I can get away with, to be honest. I'm sure it's inevitable that I'm going to get outed at some point, but I hope you guys understand at the same time. Blink twice if you need help. No, it's not shady. So why I was offered, and I started doing it remotely pretty much straight away. I'll say that. But it's a very small startup, like media stuff. It's insane. It's absolutely as quickly as I could.
Okay, so he reveals some of this later in the video, so I can skip over this tension that he's drawn. Effectively, he's working for a startup that is adjacent to content creation, adjacent to gaming, adjacent to the word blockchain. So feel free to watch the full post if you want to kind of get a little more to that. And the talents he's bringing to the space, for anybody that isn't aware of how somebody like Ethis, not Ethis specifically, can make a full-time living in the space, because I've had the opportunity to visit with several. So without worrying too much about his specific situation, just anybody like him in this space that is, you know, because we've known several that have passed through the 14 community or are still in the 14 community as active content creators. A lot of people come into content creation with a writing background. You know, Ethis included is a strong writer. We see this in a lot of scripted content. You can feel the strong writing. Brian and I are not strong writers, so this is very different than what we try to bring to the space. And when you have strong writers in the content trying to make full-time content creation, it's not uncommon for them to do freelance writing gigs. It's not uncommon for them to consult on other content creation, something more corporate. Maybe they're helping handle interviews in the space. Gaming magazines and stuff don't always have the budget to have somebody on staff that's an expert in all MMOs, so sometimes they'll partner with somebody who can act as more of that like journalistic correspondent for a particular event. In the past, there has been, like, at the EU Media Tour, it's been less content-driven as opposed to the NA, and has been more towards traditional media outlets, magazines, things like that. And so having those relationships has actually allowed people to get invites that may not have otherwise gotten invites. So in the past, when you see a video content creator get an invite to those events, don't always assume it's under their name. Sometimes they are a representative of a company that got an invite, and then they just slid into that spot, and that of course allows them to make videos as well, but they have a first and foremost responsibility when they get back to their hotel to write up whatever articles or take whatever interview segment that company wants to generate out of that invite. And so that's been and so a lot of times in content creation, I think a lot of people, you know, I know in some recent videos, I've gotten accused of being out of touch ever since I got rich. And when I told Brian that offline, we were in a video chat, and I said that, and he literally like almost fell out of his chair leaning back laughing so hard. Like, content creation, you do not go into it for the money. Don't do it. So don't. You know, I have been accused of making particular posts for the money that those individual posts will probably finish out between $5 and $6. So, like, you can either get there through having content that lives longer, right? If it generates $5 or $6 in its first month, what if it could do that in its second month, and its third month, and its fourth month? So something that lasts longer. Or you can do something that's bigger. People who have a higher view number than I do per post can make more money per video very quickly. Or you make a lot of content, which Brian and I do make a lot of content. And so each individual post doesn't make very much, but as part of a general trend, we can make a lot of posts, and it adds up eventually. That means that no one post has to go out. If I hit publish, that's a choice. Even the videos that you may not like, I had a choice, because on their own, they are each representative of a very small percentage of my total content. And so if I want to pull one, I can pull one. It's absolutely possible that Gaming Kinda will get to 100 posts this month, which means no one post is responsible for more than 1% of what Gaming Kinda will make. And so if I don't want to, so when people are like, wow, I didn't like that post, even if I didn't like it, I still had a choice to publish. I had a choice to hold it. It wasn't a money-based decision on its own. Now, I can't just not publish for 2 weeks, but it's not a money choice on its own. But when you talk about what he's doing in this space, the value he could bring to a company, there are a lot of adjacent industries that don't know how this stuff works. There are a lot of marketing companies that approach people based on number of subscribers or followers. Of all of the metrics that Brian and I look at, for different things we look at different metrics, and we look at them different ways. And when you look at it from a data standpoint, it's not that subscribers and followers don't have a value from a data standpoint, but most of it is how big is your community, and how many people have said, hey, you're worth coming back to. It's more of a self-driven metric in my mind. It's more of a self-value, a way to gauge, especially when you see growth and decline and then see average engagement across that community. A 10-year-old channel can have massively inflated numbers. So like Work to Game and Gaming Kinda generates half the views per month that Work to Game does. Work to Game's a great deal larger. Because there's probably people who've been subscribed for 3, 4, 5 years who aren't around because maybe they aren't even playing 14 anymore. They come and they go. And so when you talk about channels that have had huge growth spikes 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, they can have these massive numbers. And I can't think of a much less and so influential statistic. But people like Ethos will know what does matter. They'll know how to look at that and will pair that with, okay, what are the view counts doing? What's the watch time doing? you know, what's the average engagement? If they let us see under the hood, will the content creator be willing to show us the percentage of people that are subscribed versus not subscribed, returning versus not returning, demographics on those people? Because let's say that you're a company that caters to men's cosmetics or women's cosmetics, right? That male versus female breakdown could be valuable. Let's say that something about your product caters to a particular age group. That could be valuable. And so, like, the value Ethis could bring to a marketing company, to a gaming adjacent space, is he's aware of how to read these analytics. He's aware of how to help generate these analytics. And that doesn't come through a proper education. That comes through active integration directly with these platforms. So he's not specifically an expert on how marketing works as a big general concept. He's very, very, very honed in on specifically YouTube and Twitch. And so if they're adjacent to those platforms or wanting to be adjacent to games or creators that are on those platforms, he has a lot of value there. And so he's chosen to take a full-time job at this startup, taking on roughly that. Based on what he's been willing to describe here, he was very, very vague. He's decided to take that job.
And this is where it gets a little bit awkward. And this is where I really have to trust you guys in your discretion and maturity, I'll say. Because I made a post. I mean, it's a while ago now, like it's a couple of months ago now, but I made a post for the patrons and subs in Discord because I didn't want to compromise on the fence about whether or not I was going to, and if I'd gotten this job, you know,
So at this point in the video, once again, link will be to the whole thing down in the description below when I post this on Gaming Kinda. Effectively, when you take a career shift, it doesn't matter what it is, it affects your personal life. It affects the relationships you're in. He and his girlfriend, who's also a content creator on the platform, and I know he's trying to be incredibly cautious about how that's handled, had a choice to make, right? Because she lives in Norway where he was living and he's going back to Australia. And so, you know, that's a personal choice. But in content creation, it's such a community-driven thing. You really can't do it without the community. There's so many aspects of the way I play games and the way I create content that are a blend of my own fingerprint and the community that supported me. Not necessarily the people who come in and just say, like, baseless trash in the comments, where they just come in and, like, they literally make up objective facts about you, where, like I've been told in the last 2 weeks that I quit 14 to play other games. I've been told that I was rich. I've been told that, you know, and so these are things, it's like, wow, I had no idea. And so, not that group, but the group that give constructive feedback. The group that say thank you and support you. To the people that say, hey, based on this, would you be willing to make a video like these other things? That's a dialogue. And it's a weird dialogue because I hit publish, and so I effectively have my half of the phone call before you hear it. So even though it's in an audio format and a video format and you see my face, it's a lot closer to like an email or letter where, like, I'm not sure if the tone's going to come across right, and I have to hit publish to find out. And so you send that email and you're like, man, I hope that didn't come across aggressive. Like, I hope that didn't come across offensive. I wanted to make my point really clear, but I hope that didn't come across mean or anything like that. And then it comes back and they're like, wow, we really need to talk about your response. And you're like, oh no. Like, how did they read it? They're like, I really appreciate what you had to say. Oh, thank God. As you know, and so it is a weird dialogue. And what it results in is this natural desire to share a whole lot more personal information than really any other job I've had. Like, I've been in sales where I've had long-time relationships with clients. When I sold cardiac devices, like, I'm with those cardiologists and the nurses and the office managers as often as once or twice a week, usually less, like in person, for months on end, possibly years on end. And I'm helping them deal with incredibly high stress situations. We're talking about, you know, patient health data, talking about patients that are going through probably what will be one of the worst times of their life, if not one of the last also times of their life, because you usually get the substantial portion of your medical care is within the last small percentage of your life. And so medical professionals have a huge amount of interaction with you during those last years as they do their best to extend or at least improve the quality of those years. And so it's a high stakes environment. And with that, you end up revealing a lot of personal things about yourself. You end up revealing why you're feeling a little off today. You end up revealing what's going on in your life, why you may be unavailable coming up because you have something going on. From there, I went into home sales. And so I went and helped people go through the largest financial transactions of their life that oftentimes stretched upwards and even over a year. And they're telling you things about themselves, you know, where you're learning, hey, like, we're going to need 2 master bedrooms because we don't sleep in the same room every night. You know, these are the things I need in my bathroom. These are the things I would need in my kitchen. They're incredibly personal, intimate details because I worked for a semi-custom builder. And so we had the ability to customize if there's something about your life that needs customization. And that can be as simple as a grab bar in the shower for somebody that is worried about slipping in the shower, but that can be a lot more intimate and a lot more private than that. And that can get into them feeling that they and their spouses or possibly their children need to tell you things that you may not even want to know about them. And you just have to kind of deal with that. And so, you know, I will say that, like, grab bars in the shower are possibly the easiest to cater for and the least personal thing you could tell me. Like, it gets wild quickly. And so, but with content creation, somehow, even compared to all that, it's even more intimate. Ethis is sharing his relationships. He's sharing, you know, he goes on to talk about his health. You know, we see in this community he's talking about mental health. He's talked about his mental health. You know, people talk about their marriages and illnesses and what's going on around their house and all of this while trying not to dox themselves. But in many ways, while you may not know a content creator's full real name, their birth name, you may not know exactly where they live, you may not know their exact birthday or anything like that, you may actually know more about them than people that do know those things. They may share things with you that they don't share with people who do refer to them by their first and last name, who do come over to their direct house, who do have an awareness of their birthday or some of those other details that they can't reveal because they're such a permanent identifier of where we live. And so even when we compare this to something like Asmongold, where there's this stark attitude adjustment between Asmongold content and Zachar content, those are still existing in the same person. Dialing it up as a presenter doesn't mean it's not based in reality. It is a truthfulness. It's just through a different lens, right? Which is what, I mean, acting is. That's why method actors can get so deep, is they have the ability to skew their perspective so far that they can literally act as a different person. But content creators are sharing a lot. And so it was pretty astounding how much he revealed here. And I just wanted to kind of give some perspective on like what that's like, because I don't know of any other career where you would have to look your customers in the face and talk about a breakup with your girlfriend this openly as part of a career adjustment perspective, unless you were saying, hey, we're getting married and that means I have to move.
Several months later, it would have been an absolute no-brainer. There would have been no reason to say. See and describe is really, is really it. Is that and it was leaving within like 24 hours. So I had to make a decision. I had to pull the trigger to get home from various parts of the world for months. It only cost a couple of $1,000s. There was like a dozen police and
so at this point, he shifts his conversation to the move home, and he's talking about what it takes to get home right now. This moves to a lot more of a COVID conversation, which is a topic I typically avoid because I'm aware how charged it gets, and I'm not really willing to budge in my views, and so I just assume that other people aren't as well. So I assume that us talking about it and getting heated isn't going to be productive, because whether you get heated or not, it's not going to change how I feel. You know, my parents were both in a high-risk group waiting for the vaccines. One of my parents still is in a high-risk group, you know, relative to the rest of the population. And so, you know, and Australia has been incredibly tight around this, because even though, you know, just acting as an island and because of the way their population is dispersed, they can't afford to be reactive. They have to be proactive. I don't see how anybody can listen to this section of his video and not feel that you have a responsibility to treat your fellow humans with respect. I don't know how else to say that. I think that's it. I think it's just a respect issue. And I think it mostly comes down to empathy. Like, at this point, that's in reference to COVID. That's in reference to the fact that the Australian government did not have a classification that him needing an antidepressant is a real medical issue. I come from a family with mental health issues throughout it. I think most, or at least many, do. It's not, for how lonely it can make someone feel, it's incredibly common. It really does come down to that kind of Shakespearean, nothing is more common than people wanting to feel unique, and it's a negative side to that exact same thing. We rationalize that no one else is going through this, and we do it to our own detriment. All of these, like, isolations and stuff like that, like, I don't know how you do 2 weeks alone. I don't know how you do 2 weeks alone in a hotel room. I think it was incredibly frustrating to hear the way that he was treated through this. Just because somebody, I mean, just here, I am not in a position, either through knowledge or personal life experience, to speak for all of the different classifications of people. When we group people by mental health or by what we categorize as these lifestyle choices, what we categorize as, we imply there's a level of choice. I would just encourage you to, for a second, when you see someone else that you're ready to dismiss, ask yourself if you had a choice. When you see somebody else wanting to live differently than you, when you see somebody else wanting sympathy, ask yourself if you had a choice. I think a lot of times we assume someone else can just choose to be like us in areas that we think what we're doing is good. And yet, I don't remember having a choice in many aspects of my life to be different. There are a lot of medical things about my life that I didn't get to choose in and around, like, my genetics and what I've done to my body over the years. through poor treatment. There are a lot of things about, I guess, what Americans would consider lifestyle, where who I choose to be around and who I choose to marry and how I choose to make my living and how I choose to spend my money and where I choose to spend my time and who it's with. A lot of times that's assumed that there's a right and wrong method and that there's a choice in it. There are many aspects of that where I don't actually feel that many doors were open to me. So for a second, I would just assume, as we've gone through this last year and as people have trouble transitioning out of it, just for a second, ask yourself how many times you feel you acted a certain way because you didn't have a choice. Because you only had one or two options available and one of those sucked. And so you made a choice, and then people are now judging you for that. This isn't so much directly directed at Ethis, but just as a... When you see him, he's so good about communicating this, and you immediately have this sympathy and empathy for a set of situations that you may never experience. But it's a good reminder that there are people all over the world that are just living different than me. And it's just a respect issue. And hearing the way his government treated him, not that my government would be 100% better, it's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating that as a society, when things get hard, when we have to set systematic things in place to protect us from tragedy, our real and true understandings of the human experience come out. And it becomes very, very clear in those moments, when there's no slack in the line, what's really important. And that mental health things are not real medical issues. That someone experiencing something you can't understand because you aren't them makes it not real.
About 36 soldiers. I'm talking ADF, Australian at least not getting sort of herded bonkers without it. It was pretty maddening. Calling me, like on the phone in my home here, but it basically said, we will no longer accept room changes or special allowances on the base of mental illness. We will only entertain these requests in circumstances of real medical conditions. And I remember that, it said real medical conditions. Which was just like, this is New South Wales Health, right? This is the fucking state government that's writing this shit. It's not the hotel.
Right. And my government is entertaining similar policies for different groups of people for different circumstances, and there is more at play, right? When you talk about allocation of resources, when you talk about logistics, when you talk about, you know, avoiding mistakes, avoiding things that would long-term cause more harm than good, when you talk about avoiding those resources not helping as many people as they could, there are a lot of reasons to move forward with a policy or not move forward with a policy as a government. But when it comes to communicating with a fellow human, we need to make it abundantly clear that even if we can't move forward with something because we just don't have the resources, because resources, unfortunately, many times in life are a finite thing. Time, money, things, attention, they're finite. And that's just an unfortunate state of things. But our ability to empathize, our ability to be aware that I have to make this decision because there's more things at play than just do I care, but I do want to stop for a second and explain that I do care, is something we could be a lot better at, especially at a systematic level. Person to person, it requires a lot because you're talking about, well, did the one person have a bad day while the other person was having a bad day? And so now there's just friction before they even run into each other. But when we talk about like systematic changes, when we talk about corporations or governments interacting with groups of people, where you've got multiple people looking over these statements before they go out, where you've got multiple people looking over these policies before they're implemented, where you've got multiple people receiving feedback and making these decisions as we change policies, it's incredibly frustrating when the system as a whole is like, well, since no person can change it, we as a whole can't change it. And that sucks. That sucks.
Or you know, some idiot who's just kind of fucked up their copywriting. I'm just trying to like, they did let me like order food job that is paying, like, it's paying fairly well, like it's paying.
So at this point, he's made it to Australia. So we've gotten derailed by what was an epic journey. You should go back and listen to this. And he's arrived in Australia, and he's arrived at this job. Now, at this point, there's a weird relationship because money becomes the topic, and money is a topic that most people don't like talking about. At least here in the U.S., it's an incredibly sensitive subject. There are countries where, like, your salary is something of public record in many industries, if not all industries, as opposed to here that's really only public servants. So, you know, you can see like how much a professor at a state-funded college makes, or how much like a legislator makes, or something like that. But you can't, even then, like if that person has a book deal, that's private. So like we're very, very touchy about money. And a lot of that comes from the fact that usually that's the case when it's something where there's a lot of inequality at stake. And so when you have one person making more money for the same job as another person, the system as a whole does a whole lot better if we can keep that really quiet. And that could be because that person performs more of a task or has more seniority or something like that. But it drives friction. And so we've just found it better to just not talk about it. Whatever that means. What that means as a result is that we're not really very good at talking about money. And we're not very good at talking about costs. But in content creation, you're directly asking the people that you're entertaining to crowdfund your mortgage payment, your ability to pay for a car or put food on your table. And so as a result, there is this like desire for people to reveal how many subscribers they got, or how many donations were raised, or what their next big financial goal is, or what, you know, if they're saving towards something else that will help stream, or towards a medical bill or something like that. The downside of this is that if you ever want to pull back, right, as he talks about taking a salary for another job, is now there's this natural tendency to want to address it. There's this natural tendency to want to talk about, like, well, how much money did it take to get you to stop generating content? And so that's the unfortunate other side. Once you've kind of opened up that door, it's why I don't reveal how many subscribers we have. Not because I don't want to, but because there might be a day when I don't want to. There might be a day when I don't want that to be the focus. Right now, it's an incredibly large focus internally because it's a huge driver in my month-over-month income. And so I want to be appreciative. And one of the ways to be appreciative would be to set a milestone and celebrate it with you guys and say thank you. Unfortunately, by doing that, I would be setting up a trend where now I'm responsible to report that to you for all of time. We see this with MMOs. They used to report active subscriber numbers, and then one day they didn't. And now it looks like they took something away, as opposed to if they'd never said it in the first place, they didn't set up that tendency. The desire to take a job at your life, like, I think this is where we start to pivot to the subject of this. This is where we start to pivot.
Cost me a couple of $100 to fly down here. You got a rapid test for. That'll be really cool. Sorry, the same kind of space you pay in Sydney, up in the town. I was supposed to show up yesterday.
Okay, so he starts to talk about all this, and this starts to reveal like a lot more about like life and all of that, and how he's living right now, which I think this is where the video takes a more positive turn. But this is also where I think he's starting to struggle with that, like, did I sell out? Not every job has to be forever. One of the questions around Final Fantasy XIV right now has been, will Yoshi P stay with Final Fantasy XIV forever? And so he's come out and made a public statement alongside the CEO, who acknowledged it, that Final Fantasy XIV was his life's work and that he wouldn't want to step away. But that's not a lie if that changes. That's not a lie if 5 years from now he gets an opportunity to start his own gaming company outside of Square Enix with private investment. That's not a lie if he wants to retire. You know, he can feel that way today, and that can change. And so I think a lot of times you get to a point in your career and you take another job, and maybe it pays better, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has more time off, maybe it has more growth opportunities. Maybe it has a chance to live somewhere you've always wanted to live. Maybe it makes it easier to handle another set of changes that are going on in your life with a family member or a spouse. Life changes. There is just a set of chapters to life, and some chapters are longer than others. Some chapters have a lot more going on than others, but it just does. And I don't think this feeling of that you sold out is a healthy one. I think there's an element of guilt because the last chapter of his life is so much owed to a set of people that he doesn't feel he's gotten to directly thank. And that's not a bad feeling to have, right? That's not a bad thing about your personality, that desire to say thank you. But, like, times in your life do end. When you graduate college, you often leave that city. It's not that it's a bad city. It's not that you didn't enjoy your time there, but that chapter just ends. And so his content creation has paved the way for this new opportunity. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I will say that this is where this also starts to pivot to what does that mean moving forward?
Now, and the pressure to perform and the pressure to just like keep kind of, because I was a workaholic, you know, like you don't see a lot of it behind the scenes, but I was always going, always.
You're still always going. You don't just stop that at this. You're at work right now. I've never known anybody that was a workaholic that didn't just find a new avenue, whether they're dumping it into a charity or a new job. So I don't know that he's really gotten better, but if he has, good for him. I just, in my experience, as somebody who, I myself, like, I don't compartmentalize. I carry my job with me everywhere I go. That's why it's such a big deal to get this off my phone, because, like, I talk about YouTube constantly. I talk about what's going on in gaming constantly. I bring my job with me. I bring whatever my passion is with me anywhere I go. And so, like, I don't just turn it off. It's something I really admire about people that can do that. And it comes from a place of, like, I don't understand it because I can't do it. But he did feel that his content was starting to change as a result of he needed to chase a living. I will say at this point, this is where I think words like good and bad should probably leave the conversation if they're not willing to come with some context. Casey Neistat went to posting every day for a while as a form of forcing creative growth. So he created a metric that he had to chase to force his content. And what it did is it forced him to get off his butt and make. And so in many ways, full-time content creation drives you to get better at editing techniques, better at topic generation, better at thumbnails and titles and interacting with a community. And there's these optimizations that you learn from a sprint in your job, whatever your job may be, that are healthy skills should you ever slow back down. They're good things. Can they be done to an unhealthy degree? Absolutely. On the other side, when you remove that pressure, the ability to slow down and pay attention to detail and make something exactly the way you want it and make it perfect is a good thing. And so I think implying that full-time it was bad or that full-time was good, and implying that now that he's not full-time that that's bad or that it's good, I don't think it's that straightforward. He will probably make content that is more in line with what he wants or directly what the values within his community that he admires drives. But it also means a lot less of it. It also means that something that might have triggered him to look at his content another way might just not get made because he doesn't have to make it, because he doesn't need the money, or because he doesn't need the growth, or because he didn't set a set of rules or restrictions that forced it to get made. Money is a very obvious one, but like I said with Casey Neistat, it was just an arbitrary rule he set in. I must post once a day. And that rule was made prior to it becoming incredibly monetary successful. So I think, you know, as somebody who, like, this month will probably post the most videos I've ever posted to YouTube, I've learned a lot about content creation from this month. I'm looking at a shift next month as I take 2 weeks off. I'll probably learn a lot then, too. So I would say at this point, this is where I start to draw issue with this video. This is where I feel like I'm not just adding context, but I actually feel differently than him. I don't know that it's as much about somebody who posts less is better or somebody that posts more is better. I feel there's different strengths to both. And honestly, I think at this point, I think there's an advantage to being both at some point in your life. I think somebody who only ever posts exactly what they want, exactly when it's perfect, and has no posting schedule, and so it goes live once or twice, you know, every 2 or 3 months, they're leaving out a lot of what they would learn from posting faster. They're leaving out a lot of what they would learn from doing short repetitions. There are times that not working at your max potential, working at 65% or 55% of your potential, but working rapidly, creates massive growth. This is true in fitness. This is true in education. This is true in any field, really, where operating at less than your maximum, but operating with short rest, fast intervals, creates a growth metric. However, if you never test your max, you also don't push that top end. And so I think it's about alternating. I think it's about creating moments where you're building towards something that helps you look back and say, wow, that's my max, and that's so much higher than my previous max. You know, I've never processed that much information that quickly before. I've never worked that hard before. I've never worked out that well before. So comparing those maxes, they are these key measurable metrics. They are these high moments. They are these career-defining, exciting moments where you're doing more than you've ever done. And that's really good. But to make it fitness, right? So let's just say you can pick up a 100-pound barbell, and you want to be able to pick up a 200-pound barbell. You wouldn't just go in and pick up a 100-pound today and a 100-pound tomorrow and a 100-pound the next day, and then eventually a 105 and then a 110 all the way up to 200. That's not an effective way to get there. You would drop down from 100 to maybe a 75-pound barbell and see if you could pick it up 4 or 5 or 10 times. And you would build towards that. If you wanted to run a faster mile time, it would be the exact same. If you want to run a sub 6-minute mile time, you wouldn't just run as fast as you could until you collapsed every day until you got there. That's not an effective way to get there, and it's an incredibly effective way to get injured. And I think content creation is no different. There are some long-term projects I want to work on in the background. But to work on them, like, there's been a lot of little ideas that I've wanted to explore, and posting this rapidly has allowed me to explore those ideas in like a rough draft type format, in these discussion type formats. It's created this conversation where I've gotten this great feedback about A, the way I present myself, B, the way, you know, how well I'm communicating, and C, just a chance to try out multiple ideas. I can make 10 posts like this much, much more rapidly than I could make something where I stopped and I wrote a script and I read it until the audio sounded perfect, and then I edited various B-rolls so there was gameplay coming in and nice transitions and text overlays, where it took me 10 or 20 or 30 times as long as this video will take me to come out. But I would only get to explore that one idea that deeply, and even then, only one view of it, because I didn't get feedback along the way. So I would say, to add this like don't stop the ideas of making those fireside chats. I'm sure they take a lot less time than your lore videos. They provide a huge value to the community. And so just because something's at 65 or 75% of your max doesn't mean it's not part of something impressive. Sometimes we need to push ourselves to make something, one thing we're truly passionate about. And sometimes we need to push ourselves to just get off the couch more often, even if it's not our greatest work. So I think associating this job with moving him into a different season of creation, whether or not what you're making is videos, or maybe it's painting Warhammer miniatures, or it's leveling up in a video game, or it's whatever your hobby may be. Whether that hobby acts as a form of where it turns into your job, or it's literally just a hobby. The different seasons have different values, and just make sure you're learning something from whatever stage you're in. Knocking rapid partial reps out does teach you something. Spending a lot of time to hit perfection on one thing does teach you something. Just make sure you're learning from wherever you're at. That should be the goal, not necessarily measuring those different chapters against each other.
Always going. Like, I know the last year, I've been having a bit of trouble, like, balancing the time between the YouTube and the streams and stuff like that, but I'm also constantly, you know, writing. I'm constantly, like, working on projects with and for other people, constantly doing freelance stuff. And I just didn't stop, you know, like, I hadn't stopped at any point. Yeah, and also, yeah, and it has to be 14. And if there's, like, a week or a month where I don't really feel like playing 14, then it's like, well, you know, shit out of luck, right? Too bad.
Yeah, that's one of the hard things about only covering one game. That's why Brian and I spun up multiple channels. For people, we've had a lot of new people coming into the community, and they've wondered why that is. The reason we have multiple channels is so that we can cover multiple things, and so that we can cover them in multiple formats. It is to let us diversify. It's so that if I want to do something with Gaming Kinda that damages Gaming Kinda, I can take that risk, and it doesn't affect Ginger Prime or Work to Game. You know, this month I moved heavily into reaction content as I slated all of my non-reaction content for August so I could take 2 weeks off. That's had both positive and negative feedback. It only affects Gaming Kinda, and that's been really nice. It's been really nice to take that pressure off. So, you know, he's absolutely right. If you build yourself without diversity and you never ever diversify, what once was a palace can very quickly feel like a prison.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. And now what I'm doing now doesn't feel like work either, because I'm doing something kind of new and different every single day. You know, I'm working with like a handful of different games. Working a lot with game development, because if I'm... Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys something that I right place and you're with the right team and with the right about metrics, you know? Like, I see, we got 250 people watching right now. And that's cool, that's great. I'm really jazzed about that. But I wasn't always transparent about it. I wasn't always like obvious about it, but you know, like just like any other streamer, right? When I was doing it full time, when it was like what was going to decide whether or not I could pay my bills for the month, I was watching that number. My eyes are darting over to that number like every 30 seconds.
So this is also where I think I have an advantage over other content creators, because my previous career, right, where his previous career choices have given him the ability to write better than me, the ability to communicate much cleaner than me, to have a deeper and broader understanding of lore, both inside and outside 14. He's a strong reader. He's a great communicator in many ways. My previous industries have always been metrics driven. When you're in sales, there is usually at least one metric that you are being directly measured by each and every month, and every time your commission structure gets adjusted, they're making you chase some new KPI, and so you get very good at reading these kind of dashboard layouts, understanding what it is they're telling you, and understanding, okay, well, here's what management's looking at, here's where I'm seeing my value, how am I balancing those, because I have to do what they're asking me to do, but I don't think it's the best use of my time, so I also want to make time to do what I think is driving me, because ultimately ultimately I'm going to be held to my performance anyway. So I would rather let their metrics suffer, but the end results show up, because if the end result's not there, they're just going to fire me. And so the advantage of coming from data-driven and the advantage of working with somebody like Brian that comes from a more mathematics and programming background is that Brian and I have always understood the value of multiple data sets. Multiple data sets. And so when people do get focused on one thing, the number of people watching them live concurrently at any one time, concurrently meaning simultaneously, the concurrent viewers is the average number of viewers simultaneously each minute, every minute, averaged for the entire duration of stream. You have a peak viewership. That's the highest 1 minute average over an entire duration of stream, as opposed to the average concurrence. Within that, you can see the number of followers, you can see the number of unique visitors, the number of people that stopped by. That tells you things. You also have like average watch length, how long are they stopping by for. Sometimes number of views and unique viewers gets off enough over a very long stream, like marathon streams, where you can see that you may have multiple users coming back multiple times, where they're checking in with you for 30 minutes and coming back. You can also from there see revenue, so you can see things like ad revenue, direct donations through things like bits, continued donations through things like subscriptions. Those three tell you all very different metrics. Subscriptions are people who want to support you over a very long period of time. A donation is where, you know, that may be a more one-time thing. You know, you have adjacent things such as support through affiliate type deals, something like that, right, where you've provided a value and then they're getting something in trade for supporting you. And that's just within streaming. Then you go over to YouTube and there's a whole different wave of metrics that are shown to you. When content creators don't have that background, what can tend to happen is you look at a single metric and it becomes your single biggest driver. And chasing that metric on its own can cause you to lose sight of what grew the metric in the first place by accident. And so if in Ethos's position, if what he's trying to say about himself is the case, and we're just going to take that as flatly as he states it, is he making worse content because he's concerned about the viewer number going up and down, the concurrent views? Well, I mean, concurrent views even on its own. Well, what's the directory doing? What are you doing? Oh, like as far as like, how is it covering? How well was it presented? Who else is live at the time? Are you in your traditional time slot? Like even concurrence on its own doesn't mean anything without adjacent pieces of contextual data. So I think a lot of what content creators struggle from is that content creators are not forced to come from a data background, and yet the only feedback they're given is data. And so you have people accusing content creators of chasing the data, but like that on its own isn't that accusatory. Like that's their only feedback mechanism. So either they're utterly ignoring any feedback they're getting, or they're chasing the data. Obviously, you're going to get a more responsive, better long-term relationship with the content creator if they're at least aware of the data. The question is, what is that data telling them? If, for example, I'm covering a 14-hour live stream from Final Fantasy XIV for 8 hours as my second stream of the day, that is a different data point than what the 7-hour stream earlier that day, where I play Guild Wars on Fridays, tells me, which is different than the days of the week that I play Final Fantasy XIV. You have to add some context to your data. And so if you're starting to feel like you're a slave to the metric, add some context. What is the objective of a post? If you're posting something to reach out to a specific group of people, you're inherently capping that content. And so if you're posting something that's only meant for your subscribers and you're like, wow, that video didn't do very well. Okay, did it not do very well compared to like your getting started in Final Fantasy XIV guide? Or did it not do well compared to previous reaching directly out to your subscriber type posts? Because that's an inherently different post. And so you have to be aware of that data differently. I think a lot of my issues with his communication here is that I think a lot of his frustration, like as far as like the tension between him and his content, actually, from my perspective, just based on what he's revealed here, undervalues a lot of what like his data might actually be telling him. Like, what does, you know, just as a totally unrequested outside business analyst approach, what is your goal as a content creator, right? From the outside in, let's just ignore any personal interaction I'd have with Ethis. What would a general viewer of Ethis think? Well, I think he's a lore guy. I think he's really interested in the lore of Final Fantasy XIV, and he makes these big lore posts. And he hasn't been posting many of those recently. How come? Well, he's been Twitch streaming. Okay, well, why would he Twitch stream? Why would somebody like that Twitch stream? Well, maybe there's more money in it. Okay. Now, how do you make money on Twitch? Through donations and subscriptions. Okay. And why would somebody come in and donate or subscribe to a lore creator on Twitch who's discussing spoilers in a directory that's very spoiler sensitive? Well, probably to thank him for his YouTube content. Well, then why does concurrence matter? Right? And so, like, concurrence for him, he probably, right? I've never seen his numbers, but he could probably make more money off of a 40-person stream than somebody else could off of a 200-person stream, because they're not there just for the stream. They're there to say thank you for this other content. They're there to say, I appreciate you, and I want to have this direct dialogue about this other topic, this other relationship we have on another platform. And so, you know, I'm thrilled that he's happy where he is, and there's so much about his upcoming chapter that says this is probably for the best. And there of course was a ton of stress and unfortunate parts of the transition to this chapter of his life. It's very unfortunate that the last chapter could not just freely give way to this one, that it had to come with pains along the way. That sucks. But I will say, looking back on that chapter, with what he's chosen to reveal in this video and this video alone, I would say that it is possible that if he ever chooses to go into content creation again, as a full-time gig, that there could be a better alignment of strategies. As far as, like, what is it that makes this more sustainable? And that's coming from the fact that I've spent the last 7 months exploring what makes this sustainable for me, and I've had some of the same issues. What does a concurrent viewer mean to me on Twitch? Do I just chase the number to make it go bigger? No. No. You want to appreciate the people that are there, you do, but why are they there? Okay, well, they're there for what you're making. Okay, well, what am I making? What is what I'm making, and how well am I communicating what my goals are? That's where I started coming up with these, I want to play this on Mondays, and this on Tuesdays, and this on Wednesdays, because what that did for me is it started isolating variables. And so it started telling me, okay, if I do the same thing every Monday for a month, what do the viewer numbers around that subject tell me? What do the chat interactions on those days tell me? Because now I can start to isolate what a particular subject has as an interest level from just varying interest levels. I've been doing reaction content at the beginning of every stream, and it has a very, very different interaction from you guys than the rest of stream does. The fact that after this, I'm going to play a game. It's a very different interaction. And that's okay. They're very different types of content. And they both have value to me. You know, I have 30 types of content I want to make, and I only have time to make 10 of them. I want to make the 10 that you guys want. So I'm not going to make something you want that I don't want to make. But within the 30 that I want to make the 10 that you're most interested in. So what Data should help me do is, when there isn't time to make everything you want to make, which even now that he's full-time, yes, he'll be able to make exactly what he want to make, but he won't have as long in the day to do it, because now he's got a full-time job. So he's going to make less content. And so he's still going to have choices on what to cover next, because he can't get to everything. And so within that, how do you use data to drive those choices? And in the moment that data is not helping you, how do you isolate yourself from it? Because you don't want it to drive to the point where you don't like the creative process. You know, in recent weeks, I've established what would normally be guidelines set by HR for myself. I've established guidelines on what level of interaction do I have with the community outside of work, what level of interaction do I have with community when I'm at work, and these are rules to protect myself and my mental health around the space. In the past, I've also had choices on how often do I publish, how often do I work, and how do I make sure that I'm applying the right amount of effort towards the things that make money, because I am a full-time creator. I have a full-time working wife, and we live in a small old house. We drive reasonable cars, and we live a very reasonable lifestyle. And so, you know, I don't need the money today, but I do need the money eventually to come in. And so how do I make sure I'm working myself towards goals that put me to a point where I don't ever feel like I need the money? Because I'll tell you, I'm not going to chase content for that. I'll just go back and take a job. And so how do I make sure that this is something where over a year or 2 years or 5 years that I'm getting what I need? That business side of me is there. How do I make sure that I'm making something and I'm putting it out in a way where it's in front of the right people, that people are enjoying it, that it's presented in a way that they enjoy? That's all driven by data. But also, how do I just enjoy making the content I enjoy making, the artistic side of it? Now, in a larger venture, somebody like Bellular, where there's 20 people and there's 8 people directly on the YouTube team, that's a different way to do it, because you might literally have different people individually responsible for different parts of that job. But when you talk about something that's more on the size of Ethos Asher, or more on the size of me and Brian, or more on the size of Mr. Happy or Zepla, there's usually not a ton of people around them. Some of the ones I just named may have had an editor involved, may sometimes have an editor involved, may have varying forms of people that assist them. But most of it is a one-man shop. Most of it, when I'm looking at analytics, that's a set part of my day where I'm applying the business background that I have to it. But there's also parts of the day where I'm just making content. I don't really pay a ton to the analytics side while I'm live. I review my live statistics probably 4 to 5 days a week, usually for about 30 minutes after stream. There's oftentimes a timer set, so I don't spend too long dwelling on it. And I review it after the fact. That's my answer to what Ethos says here. Is how do you not just worry about the number? You just can't. You just can't. It's what allowed me to get through a stream where Final Fantasy chose to roll out a marketing campaign that I had an emotional response to. Well, how did that not affect my workday? Because it can't. Because it can't. Because my stream is my workday. And, you know, just like if you're waiting tables, this is a lot like waiting tables. It is you. You do it because you like helping people. You're enjoying the job. But that doesn't stop just because you're not. Anybody who's ever been customer facing in a job, whether you're working in retail or food service or in sales or in customer service, anybody who's ever been forward facing, there's wonderful days in your job and there's hard days in your job. And you know what the difference between them is as far as whether or not you get to show up and be in a good mood? None. None. So to people that want to talk about the difference in full-time content creation, one of the things I really struggle with is when I hear somebody that says they're a full-time content creator, this is not at all directed at Ethos. Ethos is nothing but a professional, is that when I have interacted with people in the past, they have said, well, I just don't stream when I'm having a bad day. If this is a hobby, that's great. That's awesome. What a luxury. But if this is your full-time job, then you're being disrespectful to the people that support you, to the people who subscribe. Sometimes some of you subscribe for multiple months at a time. As far as I'm concerned, that's a transaction where you're saying, I love what you do, and you're paying me to show up, to put on effectively a radio show, as far as the best way to explain it to my parents. And radio hosts don't just go, well, sorry, there's not going to be any radio today because I just woke up and I just wasn't feeling great. Guys, I was sick all weekend and I don't feel great right now. But it doesn't matter. Like, suck it up. Like, just, you know, so I will say the advantage that Ethos is going through is now the thing that he has to suck it up and do on the days he likes and enjoy doing on the days he likes is he does that with his primary job. And now content creation can be separated from that. It can be separated from that negative energy. And that's wonderful. And for his style of content will likely create something that is deeply passionate and emotional. But just be aware it's not about one thing being good or one thing being bad. I've already seen comments in his section and other sections, or when this topic gets brought up, talking about when one creator makes more content, they like that, or one creator creates less content, they like that, or more importantly, when I see people going into comment sections and posting, I don't like this person because they post too little or too much. That just can't be the barometer by which you judge people. Because they're just different. There are people that post less because that's what they want to do, and there's people that post more because that's what they want to do. We're going to get a lot less content from Ethos, and that's okay. It's why Brian and I ask for more content creators. Rather than putting the pressure on individual content creators to be sustainable at the rate that the community wants to consume the content, what would fix it is more viewpoints, more styles of content being made, more creators. And that's not ones I like and ones I don't. So just be aware, you know, when you guys are supporting creators the way you do. I think what this post really brought out was a lot of the feelings around, like, should Ethos feel guilty for taking a full-time job? And the answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. Should he feel guilty if he decides to come back to full-time content creation down the line? Absolutely not. Content creation is a choice. You're a member of the community first. You're a member of the community first. There are very few people that actually become a member during content creation, and usually that's because they're already a member of an existing space. So, you know, we have all these WoW creators coming in, and they're playing 14 for the first time as part of their content creation. They were already part of the MMO space. They were already gamers first. The vast majority of people go into content creation as an extension of the fact that they're a member of this community. And I hope that everybody can understand, you know, obviously he feels self-conscious about this, so I just wanted to address it. Ethos is a beloved member of this community and likely always will be. But even if he's not, even if he chooses to stop playing 14 or stop posting altogether, thank you for the stuff you have shared. Thank you for the stuff you've shared along the way. I think that if somebody wants to post for 3 months and then leave, that's okay. That's okay. It's up to Ethos what he wants to share, and it's up to us to decide how we want to appreciate it. You know? Lemon drops in chat from Recipe Reborn, and she stopped posting for a full year, and that has YouTube monetization ramifications. Because if you stop posting for a year, YouTube will no longer pay you on your ads. So having long-term content that generates a steady amount of views every month for more than a year, if you're not going to keep posting, doesn't actually provide value, which is something I didn't even know. I don't really do a lot of long-form content, like as far as like the life of the content goes. Like having a long, you know, like where there's going to be a video that lives out there for a year or 2 years or 3 years. And so I typically think about it as the video comes in, it lives its life, and it dies. But somebody like Ethos, that's a very real effect. So say thank you while you can. And if any of you ever choose to jump in, just know you are not obligated to the life of content creator forever. You can post and you can change, and you don't owe anybody anything. That's all it is. You owe them exactly what you told you that you owed them. What's hard about it is, like, if he ever, you know, if he had YouTube support based around and then he stopped posting, how does that work? If people subscribe to him on Twitch and then he stops streaming, how does that work? But I think when you look back at the lifespan of the amount he's contributed to the community, the 1% of people that are hurt by just unfortunately hitting subscribe the day before he stops, if he ever just hard stops, that's way less than the positive impacts he's had. Get your voice out there, and Ethis, just know that that's a self-driven battle you've put on yourself. You called yourself a sellout in this video, or that you were feeling like you were a sellout, or that maybe you could be perceived as a sellout. No. What you're revealing is that you're a human with multiple chapters to your life. We only get one spin at this. We don't get to go back and redo it. You make the best decision that you can at the time, and you live with it, and you try to make a better decision next time around. And there are opportunities available to you now that weren't available sooner, so it doesn't even say that previous decisions were wrong by making a different decision now. I think it's really awesome that he's getting a chance to do something that he probably never saw would be an opportunity. That's really cool. And that can be totally independent of our love for his content. So, thank you, Ethis. This was a weird form of reaction, and somehow, even without watching your post, I talked longer than you. So, just know that we love you whether you post or you just post, kinda.